Original post, how are you paying for this place? My sister mocked me at dinner, until the waiter revealed the truth that left my entire family shocked. To start with some background, I, 32 male, have always been the less successful sibling compared to my sister, Emily, 35 female. She's the golden child, good grades, prestigious college, solid career, married to a successful husband, Mark, and living in a nice house. Meanwhile, I was always labeled as the family disappointment. I struggled in community college, jumped between odd jobs, and spent years just trying to keep my head above water. My parents never outright insulted me, but their favoritism toward Emily was obvious. They celebrated every little thing she did while downplaying or outright ignoring my accomplishments. Over time, I stopped sharing much about my life with them because it always ended with some sort of comparison. What they don't know is that things turn around for me. I worked my way up in a restaurant chain, starting out bussing tables, then moving through different roles until I became the general manager of one of the flagship locations. I've been with the company for years now, and I even have a small ownership stake. It's stable, fulfilling, and pays well enough that I live comfortably. But I never told my family any of this. Not because I was hiding it out of shame, but because I honestly didn't feel like I owed them an explanation anymore. A week ago, I decided to invite my parents, Emily, and Mark out for dinner. I thought it would be nice to spend time together and maybe, just maybe, feel like part of the family again. I chose a restaurant I know well, one I help run. From the moment we sat down, I could feel the tension. Emily looked around with raised eyebrows and said, "Wow, this place is fancy. Didn't expect this from you." She said it with a laugh, but there was that undertone, the same old jab about me not being able to afford things like this. My parents exchanged glances, but said nothing. I tried to ignore it, focus on the menu, and enjoy the evening. But every so often, Emily slipped in another comment about how expensive everything looked or how she hoped I wasn't going overboard. By the time appetizers were cleared, Emily leaned back in her chair, smirked, and hit me with a question that still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. She said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "So, how are you paying for this place? Did you win the lottery? Or is it on credit again?" My parents chuckled. Even Mark smirked. I sat there, humiliated as the memory of years ago, when I once put a dinner on my credit card because I was broke, flashed back. They never let me live it down, and here was again, turned into a punchline at my expense. I felt small. I felt like I was 22 again, struggling, broke, and being laughed at by my own family. And then, the twist. As I sat there in silence, the waiter arrived with our entrees. He smiled at me and said casually, "As always, sir, your employee discount has already been applied. The owner also asked me to let you know dessert will be comped for you and your family tonight." The table went dead silent. Emily's smirk vanished instantly. My mom blinked at me in confusion. My dad looked completely thrown off and muttered, "Wait, what?" I just gave a small smile and said, "Yeah, I work here." The waiter, without realizing the bombshell he'd just dropped, added cheerfully, "He's one of the best managers we have. Runs this place like clockwork." Then he left us to process that. Emily suddenly found her drink very interesting. My parents stared at me like they were seeing me for the first time in years. Mark cleared his throat awkwardly and changed the subject. I didn't rub it in. I didn't explain further. I simply enjoyed my meal. For once, nobody made another joke at my expense. When the bill came, reduced heavily by my discount, I paid it without hesitation. My dad asked cautiously, "So, how long have you been working here?" I explained briefly that I've been with the company for years, worked my way up, and now manage this location. Emily tried to downplay it with, "Oh, well, good for you," but her face was red. She wasn't laughing anymore. My parents, for the first time in my adult life, actually looked proud of me. It was a strange, bittersweet feeling. Now I'm left wondering how to feel about all this. On one hand, I feel vindicated. After years of being the butt of every joke, Emily finally got shut down in a way I didn't even plan. On the other hand, I feel a little guilty for enjoying the moment so much. So, Reddit, I'm asking, am I wrong for feeling smug that my sister finally got put in her place? Should I bring this up with my family directly? Or just let it go and move on? Update 1. So, I wanted to give an update because things didn't just end at that dinner. If anything, that night was only the beginning of a bigger mess. After we left the restaurant, Emily pulled me aside in the parking lot. She wasn't embarrassed in the way you might expect. Instead, she doubled down. She called me pretentious and accused me of staging the whole thing just to embarrass her. Her exact words were, "You think you're so clever bringing us here to show off. Nobody likes to show off, you know." I was stunned. I hadn't planned any of this. I'd chosen that restaurant because it's my workplace, yes, but also because I get a discount and I thought it would be nice for the family to experience it. I told her that. She rolled her eyes and said, "You're right. You just wanted to rub it in our faces." Later that evening, my parents called me. Instead of supporting me, they asked me to be the bigger person and not make Emily feel bad. Apparently, she went home upset and complained that I had humiliated her. My mom said, "You know how sensitive she is. Maybe you should have told us about your job before springing it on her like that." I felt defensive immediately. Why was it my fault that she mocked me in public and got shut down by reality? For those asking about my sister in the comments, let me give a little more context. Emily has always been the favorite child. Growing up, she was praised endlessly for every small achievement. If she got to be on a test, it was brilliant. If I got an A, it was, well, you should have. In adulthood, she's had her own struggles, but they've always been swept under the rug. She once racked up a ton of credit card debt, and my parents quietly bailed her out. She bought a house she couldn't really afford, and when things got tight, guess who helped cover her mortgage for a few months? Yep, my parents. But despite all that, she projects this image of being untouchable. She's married to Mark, who makes good money, and she constantly reminds everyone how comfortable their lifestyle is. She looks down on me because she assumes I'm still scraping by. That's why the dinner hit her so hard. In her mind, I was supposed to be the failure sibling forever. Finding out that I'd built something stable, without even telling them, shattered that narrative. Over the next few days, my parents kept calling me, urging me to smooth things over. My mom said, "You know your sister. She's always been competitive. Why didn't you just tell us earlier? You made her look bad." That part stung. It wasn't enough that Emily had mocked me in public. Now, it was somehow my responsibility to manage her feelings. I pushed back. I told them I didn't hide my career out of spite. I just got used to not being respected. I reminded them that every time I tried to share good news in the past, it was dismissed or overshadowed by Emily's latest achievement. Why would I go out of my way to explain myself to people who never care to ask? They didn't have much to say to that. My dad sighed and said, "We just don't want the family to fight. Can't you let this go?" Unfortunately, Emily didn't just let it go. Instead, she escalated. Within a week, I started hearing through mutual friends and extended family that Emily was telling people I was lying about my job. She apparently told my aunt that I was just a waiter who pretended to be a manager for attention. She told a cousin that I was delusional and exaggerating my role. I shouldn't have been surprised, but it still hurt. Instead of owning up to her behavior at dinner, she decided to attack my credibility. I didn't get into a screaming match with her. Instead, I quietly made sure the truth spoke for itself. I updated my LinkedIn profile, which I had been neglecting, so that my title, responsibilities, and company affiliation were clear. I handed out a few business cards when asked, and I know for a fact that some of my mutual friends have dined at my restaurant and have seen me in action. Eventually, word got back around to my parents. Even they couldn't deny the truth anymore. My mom admitted on the phone, Emily might have exaggerated things, which in my mom's language basically means Emily lied. But instead of backing down, Emily flipped the script again. She accused me of turning the family against her. She texted me this long rant about how I've always been jealous of her and how I finally found one little thing I was good at and was milking it for validation. I didn't even respond. What's the point? Now my parents are walking on eggshells. They don't know how to handle the fact that Emily is in full meltdown mode. But deep down, I can tell they still lean toward excusing her behavior. My mom said recently, she's just threatened because she's used to being the one everyone looks up to. Great. So now her insecurity is somehow my responsibility. Again, so here I am, weeks after that dinner, and things are more strained than ever. I'm proud of what I built, but instead of being happy for me, my family has turned it into drama. Emily is still spreading rumors. My parents are stuck in the middle, but keep asking me to be the bigger person. I can't tell if I'm overreacting by being hurt, or if I'm finally seeing the truth about my family dynamics. So Reddit, what do I do now? Do I cut Emily off completely, or do I try to keep the peace for my parents' sake? Update 2. I honestly thought things would calm down after my last post. I figured Emily would eventually let it go, or at least stop making me the target of her bitterness once it became clear the truth wasn't on her side. But instead, she decided to escalate in the most dramatic, humiliating way possible. A couple of weeks ago, she actually showed up at my workplace, in the middle of a Friday dinner rush, no less. For context, that's one of the busiest nights of the week, and as general manager, I'm constantly moving around, coordinating staff, checking on guests, and making sure everything runs smoothly. When I saw Emily walk in, I froze for a second. She wasn't alone. She had brought a couple of her friends. I could already tell by the smirk on her face that this wasn't going to be a pleasant visit. Sure enough, the moment she spotted me, she raised her voice loud enough for half the dining room to hear and said, "See? He's just a waiter pretending to be important." The whole restaurant seemed to pause for a second. A few guests turned to look. My employees stiffened, clearly uncomfortable. Before I could even respond, one of my shift supervisors walked over and said firmly, "Actually, he's the general manager. He's the reason this place runs the way it does." Another server chimed in, "Yeah, without him, we'd all be drowning right now." And then, to really drive the point home, one of the owners happened to be dining that night. He stood up, walked over, shook my hand in front of everyone, and said, "Best manager in the company. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Emily's face turned bright red. Her friends looked mortified, and I just stood there calm, because for once I didn't have to defend myself. The truth spoke louder than her lies ever could. Word of Emily's little stunt traveled fast. By the next day, my parents had heard all about it. This time, though, they couldn't spin it as me embarrassing her. She had embarrassed herself, and them, by showing up at my job and making a scene. When they called me, they sounded genuinely horrified. My mom said, "I can't believe she would do that." In public, no less. My dad, who usually downplays everything, admitted, "That was unacceptable. We raised her better than that." It was the first time I'd ever heard them openly acknowledge that Emily's behavior was toxic. For once, they weren't excusing her. For once, they weren't asking me to smooth things over. That conversation with my parents opened up a whole other can of worms. My dad confessed something I'd suspected for years, but never heard out loud. He said, "We babied Emily because we thought she needed the help. You always seemed like you were struggling. We figured she'd succeed anyway, and you might not, so we wanted to give her extra support. We never meant to make you feel less." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All those years of being treated like the failure child weren't accidental. They were deliberate. They assumed I'd never amount to anything, so they focused all their energy on propping her up. I told them exactly how that felt growing up. I told them how every accomplishment of mine was brushed aside, how every mistake of Emily's was excused, and how I learned to stop sharing because I was tired of being dismissed. I told them how humiliating it was to sit through family dinners where I was the punchline, and how the restaurant incident wasn't the first time she mocked me. It was just the loudest. My parents were quiet for a long time. Then my mom said softly, "We didn't realize we hurt you that much." I replied, "You may not have realized it, but I've been living with it my whole life." A few days later, Emily demanded to meet. Against my better judgment, I agreed, because part of me still hoped we could resolve things. We met at a coffee shop. She wasted no time. She crossed her arms and said, "You owe me an apology. You embarrassed me at that restaurant, and now Mom and Dad are mad at me. This is your fault." I almost laughed. After everything she'd done, she still thought I was the one who should apologize. I told her, calmly but firmly, that I wasn't apologizing. I reminded her of what she said at dinner, the rumors she spread afterward, and the stunt she pulled at my workplace. I told her she had been belittling me for my entire life and that I was done putting up with it. She rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, get over yourself. You think you're better than me now." I said, "No, I just finally see you for what you are, and I'm not going to tolerate it anymore. After that meeting, things blew up even more. Emily ran straight to my parents and twisted the story, claiming I had attacked her and refused to reconcile. My parents called me again, this time begging me to forgive her for the sake of family. My mom cried on the phone, saying she didn't want her kids to be estranged. But I held my ground. I told them I wasn't cutting them off, but I would no longer engage with Emily unless she treated me with respect. I made it clear that I wouldn't tolerate any more mockery, lies, or public scenes. They didn't like hearing that, but they also didn't fight me as hard as before. I think they're starting to realize that I'm serious. The final straw came at a small family gathering a week later. Emily showed up, clearly still seething, and tried one last time to get a rise out of me. In front of everyone, she said, "Well, at least I don't have to hide behind a restaurant job to feel important." For once, nobody laughed. Nobody smiled. My parents didn't say a word. The silence was deafening. I looked at her and said calmly, "And at least I don't need to tear down my own family to feel better about myself." She opened her mouth to reply, but when she saw that nobody was on her side, she just grabbed her purse and stormed out. It was the most satisfying moment of my life. Not because I won, but because finally the truth was undeniable. So here I am now. Part of me feels vindicated. After years of being treated like the underachiever, I finally stood up for myself and didn't let Emily rewrite the story. But part of me also feels sad. Sad that it had to come to this. Sad that my own sister would rather destroy our relationship than accept me as an equal. My parents are shaken. They've admitted they handled things poorly, but they're still clinging to the hope that I'll make peace with Emily. I don't see that happening. Right now, I'm leaning toward going low contact, maybe even no contact. For the first time in my life, I feel free, like I don't have to prove myself anymore. Reddit, I'd love your perspective again. Am I wrong for cutting ties with my sister, even if it means my parents will be caught in the middle? Or is this just the only way to finally protect my own peace? Final update. It's been several months since everything blew up with Emily. After that final confrontation at the coffee shop and her public meltdown in my workplace, I made the decision to go low contact with her. I still hear occasional things through mutual family friends, but I've stopped engaging. I realized that no argument, no explanation, and no amount of validation from me would change her perspective or stop her from attacking me. My parents, however, have started to rebuild their relationship with me, but it's been gradual and private. They no longer expect me to smooth things over with Emily or to be the bigger person at her expense. They call or visit without judgment, and for the first time in years, those interactions feel genuine rather than performative. Professionally, things couldn't be better. My restaurant continues thriving under my management, and my partnership stake is growing steadily. I'm proud of what I've built, but more importantly, I no longer feel the constant need to prove myself to anyone. For the first time in my adult life, I'm free from the cycle of comparison and judgment that my family, particularly Emily, used to perpetuate. Socially, I've surrounded myself with supportive friends and colleagues who respect me for my work ethic and accomplishments. It's a different kind of validation, one that isn't tied to the toxic patterns of my family. Personally, I feel calmer, lighter, and more confident. Every time I think back to the dinner, the public humiliation attempts, or the rumors, I no longer feel hurt or defensive. Instead, I feel empowered by how I handled everything, with dignity, patience, and firmness. From what I hear, Emily's life hasn't been all smooth sailing. Rumors suggest her marriage is strained, and she still refuses to acknowledge the role her behavior played in driving a wedge between herself and the family. She hasn't attempted to reach out to reconcile, and frankly, I don't expect her to. I've accepted that this is no longer my problem. Her choices, her insecurities, and her public stunts are hers to manage. My energy is too valuable to waste trying to fix someone who has consistently refused to take responsibility. I feel a strange sense of relief knowing that I don't need to engage anymore. The truth about me has spoken for itself, and that's all that matters. Eventually, my parents came to a deeper understanding. In private conversations, They finally apologized for years of dismissing me and for the favoritism they showed toward Emily. It wasn't a dramatic, tearful confession, just sincere acknowledgement of the imbalance in how I was treated. I didn't gloat, and I didn't need to. I accepted it, not because I needed validation, but because it felt like a genuine moment of closure. Finally, the family dynamic that had made me feel less than for so long was being corrected, at least in my interactions with them. They didn't try to force me back into the old pattern of acquiescence or make me responsible for Emily's actions. That was the real gift: respect, understanding, and a reset of boundaries. Looking back on everything, I feel a deep sense of peace. I'm proud of myself, not in a way that's arrogant, but in a way that acknowledges the years of persistence, hard work, and patience it took to get here. I've learned that sometimes the best way to deal with toxic people, even family, is not to fight them, not to argue endlessly, but to continue building your life until the truth speaks for itself. I've also learned that boundaries are essential. Success, dignity, and self-respect are all intertwined, and protecting them sometimes requires stepping away from people who refuse to respect you. I no longer define myself by my sister's or my parents' perceptions. I define myself by my actions, my achievements, and the values I hold. To anyone reading this who has faced similar family dynamics, it's okay to prioritize your own peace and to step back from those who minimize your worth. It doesn't make you cruel or selfish. It makes you resilient and self-aware. Thank you, Reddit, for the advice along the way. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't in dramatic confrontations or public showdowns. Sometimes, it's in simply succeeding quietly, living well, and letting the truth speak for itself. I don't need to prove anything to Emily anymore. I don't need her approval or anyone else's. I'm finally free, and that feels better than any victory I could have imagined.